The planet Mars, symbolizing separation and the severing principle, as well as the archetype of initiation. Picture an arrow off the cliff flying through the air on its way with intention, kind of similar to the Mars glyph, ingressed into the sign of its fall in Cancer on August 11th, and it will stay there until September 27th when it travels to Leo. So a fairly long time. And this transit brings really into focus, in the simplest of terms, anger in the home and even violence in the home. And I find it really interesting that just as that planet ingressed, the trial of Lindsay Clancy has been all over the world of social media and the news, with, of course, many various opinions weighing in. For our purposes, we can allow the astrology of this time to illuminate and help us understand the symbolic struggles and collective responses around Mars and Cancer. That something like this news story brings up in each of us, because Mars and Cancer will ask us to reflect on the true consequences of the kind of dynamics that are just still all too common behind closed doors. And it's my hope that we can use the astrology to bring awareness, consciousness, understanding, and of course, transformation of Mars in the home, Mars and Cancer dynamics that so many of us have survived or are currently even dealing with in relationship, family matters, and matters relating to mothering, nurturance, and parenting. All lunar topics related to the ruler and host of Mars and Cancer, the moon. Hi, I'm Amy Rose White. I'm an integrative psychotherapist, and I'm also a counseling astrologer, making YouTube videos with concrete self-healing tools, including a meditation, a mirror work, and a mantra for each transit by the end of this video. Be sure to check out my free resources below and links to book with me in September. Just have a few days left. So as someone that's had a 30-year career in perinatal mental health, which is pregnancy through postpartum and anything related to reproductive mental health, and as nearly 20 years as a perinatal mental health expert and trauma therapist, what is so clear to me right now is that Mars and Cancer has brought into focus collective matters, Pluto and Aquarius, that the individual, Jupiter and Mercury currently in Leo's very concerned about individuality, has historically tried to give voice to and try to solve these inner and outer problems without avail. And just as one example that's relevant to my work, the general public and many medical providers still aren't even aware that the number one complication of childbirth is depression and anxiety. Many people still aren't aware that the time of the highest risk for a woman to be a victim of violence in the home is when she becomes pregnant. So I mention that not because of the potentially relevant examples going on in the news right now, but because of the way the outer planets have been configured to each other for quite some time now. And the major astrology of June, July, and August is continuing to highlight the need in the group, in the collective, Pluto and Aquarius, for the deconstruction. Saturn and Neptune, remember they made that conjunction at 0 degrees of Aries on February 14th of this year, of social constructs and norms, especially in institutions, whether that's the law, police, medicine, mental health, public assistance, any of those spaces that don't seem to serve either individual or the group. And there's a magnifying glass, Pluto is definitely a giant magnifying glass, on not only groups that are underserved and exploited and without justice, but it acts as a magnifying glass on our own personal injuries that get highlighted when systems fail. And that's the origin of what people might call getting triggered, right? We have our own empathy and humanity that arises, of course, when we can imagine ourselves in other shoes, but all too often we've actually been in those shoes on some level. So when we cry at a movie or a news story, or maybe we see an animal hit on the side of the road, and it brings up a lot of emotion in us, we're also crying for the vulnerable creature within us, the vulnerable person within us, the one who was not seen, heard, understood, or perhaps never received justice. So now as Mars is in Cancer in a weakened state, meaning it has something to overcome because it's in its fall in Cancer, which is, Cancer is all about fullness and growth, and here Mars wants to cut ties. Venus in Libra, where she's strong, is clearly reflected by the voices of women that are increasingly amplified at this time about all kinds of things that women historically have not had the ability to weigh in on, especially in a way where their personal stories, our narratives and perspectives could be shared with millions of people at the click of a button. And so whether that's on the subject of family violence, women's mental health, or very mundane things like why we feel this compulsion to dye our hair, for example, I still might do something to this, by the way. that's also been in my feed quite a bit as I've entered my Silver Sister journey. There's this amplification of the feminine voice at this moment, and it is loud. One of my last thumbnails was titled, "It's Time to Roar." That was not by accident. And that energy is not going anywhere anytime soon. On Monday the 17th, that Mars that really needs some help to transform, to go from the archetype of violence in the home to protector of the home, makes a square to Neptune. And because being a protector of the home is the highest octave of Mars in Cancer, as you could have guessed by my thumbnail, it really calls into question, what are we willing to protect? How far will we go? What will we sacrifice to do that, to do what's right? And what will we be willing to release around our own selfish desires, Mercury, Jupiter, and Leo? That's Elvis, to protect those who we love and those who need protecting. How are we to be a voice for the voiceless and the vulnerable? This is a question that's being asked of all of us. So when the square Mars makes Neptune, we're forced to face where we've been in denial or self-deception around events that have happened in our own homes, that are currently happening in our own homes. And that might be our childhood. That's very much Cancer, looking back to the past. It's concerned with looking back. After all, the moon is our memories. It's associated with memory in the past because it's a reflective light. Doesn't have its own light. So looking back at the environment that we find ourselves in the past and now, which includes the body mind, the moon, all of that is so impacted by those early experiences around nurturance, mothering, and parenting, Cancer is going to be in our minds. So we've likely come face to face with some harsh truths, especially because Mercury and Leo will trine Saturn in Aries, asking us to grow up, but we'll feel more like doing that. And also provide some rewards in how we relate to ourselves, our self-concept, Saturn and Aries, getting stronger by virtue of that trine between Mercury and the Sun. In the sign of one that is very concerned about, Leo, personal identity and expression, which trines that Saturn retrograde this week. So this week of the 17th. So we'll be more able to receive information, even though Saturn in that superior trine in the sign of Aries, which is very much around our individual identity as well. So we might find ourselves clearer with our thoughts and our beliefs. We're going to see that in the collective too, or at least more curious about new ways of seeing old problems. That would be the ultimate best outcome of Mercury in Leo trining Saturn while Mars squares Neptune. Because there's a change in perception and what we're willing to physically do. As a result of sort of being able to see what is true more clearly. Neptune, Mars really wants us to figure that out. And Saturn's here to help break us free from illusions and grasp the material world. Remember, Saturn's job is to transition us from form to formlessness. And it's up to us with Mars in Cancer to decide what form we want that to take. In this case, what kind of family environment, what kind of inner and outer protection in our homes do we need to create now? And then on September 1st, Mars will make a square to Saturn. And I predict the collective conversation specifically to family violence will have some kind of culmination moment. Whether that's something really gruesome like what's on the news right now, early August, or highlighting on forms of emotional abuse or other kinds of dysfunction that get perpetuated not only through lifetimes and lineages, but within our own minds, we're reaching a decision point for many of us personally. And that might be where we simply know that certain family dynamics and relationships are just no longer serving us, or where there's actually some concrete change that must occur now by virtue of setting new boundaries or instituting new practices and even rules in our homes. Aries is very concerned with getting this done now. And if it's not us facing something that really needs to change, a boundary that needs to be set in the home, we're going to increasingly see those dynamics reveal themselves in the people around us, where it's clear what dynamics actually have been going on. And people will make changes and new lives will actually be created. This is a good thing because remember, this transit is happening in the middle of eclipse season. So a lot of endings around family dysfunction that are not meant to continue. And although ultimately this is a good thing, this provides a lot of discomfort for Mars in Cancer. We would much prefer these insights and revelations to somehow just unfold in a gentle way. But Mars in Cancer can sometimes mean that a sudden change is needed. especially when safety is involved. Emotional safety, physical, spiritual, financial safety, or otherwise. And what's wonderful about Mars in Cancer is that it is very likely, especially in Leo season with Mercury and Jupiter and the Sun all there, to continue to inspire us to that archetype of the lioness that I've been talking about so much. Well, Leo and the lion gets enough attention, but I'm focused on the lioness. And if you've ever gone down an Instagram rabbit hole watching female lions smacking male lions when they are mean to their cubs, you know the primal energy that gets stirred up when you just watch something like that. And if you happen to be in a mothering role, or you're a mother yourself, or in any way, shape, or form in your life, you know what that feels like in your body. And right now, we need to connect to that energy. So what I encourage you to do with Mars in Cancer through the end of September is to notice in the body what you're carrying, if you're exposed, or what comes up. If you're exposed to anything in the news that's upsetting relating to these subjects, family violence, maternal violence, coercive control, domestic interpersonal violence, anything of that nature, it brings up some stuff in the past. You're grappling with this in your own life now, or the lives of the people you care about. What I really encourage you is to get a punching bag. I probably make this recommendation several times a day, especially for women of a certain age. But I really recommend it for everyone. That probably isn't where you thought this video was going. Go on Facebook Marketplace if you're in the United States. I'm sure there's a version of that out in other countries. And whether it's a speed bag, or I like those really big, tall ones that are heavy that you have to hang from chains, somewhere like the garage, and some like thinly padded MMA gloves, to on the daily, channel some of the feelings of pain and grief, sadness, despair, collapse, and anger, to channel that in a healthy way. Because the archetypal symbolism of Mars in Cancer and everything that's, and whatever we're exposed to out in the world or in the news is not just about really taking a hard look at what we do in our own homes and making action there, but it's also how we take care of the physical body that has to hold all of this in our minds, and the feeling of responsibility for protecting ourselves and other people, and an injustice that often surrounds the family dynamics, both in our past and in the lives of people that we love, or maybe currently even for some of us right now. So regularly making time to move the body and use the Martian energy of war and aggression and severing and cutting in a cathartic therapeutic way can make the difference between getting sick and depressed under the heaviness of all that versus staying healthy and vital and alive and focused on the next right thing we need to do in this moment. So your meditation for Mars in Cancer until the end of September is, where in my own life could I move from defensiveness and striking out into a place of self-protection and truly protecting those I love in more effective ways? Your mirror work for the transit is straight spine, deep breath, look into your left eye, soften the front face of the body. Now is the time to stand up for what is right. And your mantra for the transit is, I am a powerful force of love in my home. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for every single one of you who likes, who just taps that button, who subscribes. It is free to do so. I'm having so much fun reading your thoughtful comments. I truly appreciate it. The links to book with me in September are below. If you like this video, you'll enjoy the ones above me. And until next time, bye for now.